When I sat down to watch episode 1 of Sean Combs' The Reckoning on Netflix, I wasn't expecting to walk away with a relationship masterclass in how dangerous men are formed. But baby, this episode is a blueprint, not a celebrity expose, a psychological case study in what happens when childhood wounds, unchecked ego, and unlimited access collide. What this documentary reveals is bigger than Diddy. It's a warning label for every woman, every person actually, who has ever ignored a red flag because it was wrapped in talent, confidence, ambition, or charm. Episode 1 shows us the origin story of a manipulator, the entitlement, the jealousy, the early rehearsals for control, long before the fame, the money, or the lawsuits. And as a relationship coach, I want you to see the patterns before they become your lived experience. Let's break down some of the traits in episode 1 that were put on full display and the lessons every woman needs to understand if she's going to date with discernment in 2025 and beyond.
So I just got done watching the first episode of the Diddy documentary that's on Netflix, and when I tell you this documentary has me tuned in, but I'm gonna break everything down for y'all, give y'all the highlights and the most important things that happen in this episode just in case y'all ain't got the time to watch the whole thing. In the first episode, Pain vs. Love, they take a deep dive into Diddy's early life. So his early career, how he was brought up, and how everything that happened to him in his past shaped him to be the person that he is today. For an example, hip-hop producer and friend of Diddy's, Tim Dog Patterson, he talks about how Janice and Diddy moved into his building and him and Diddy used to hang out and they became like brothers. And he also talks about how Diddy's mom used to spoil him with nice things and clothes, and he felt like she was compensating for the loss of her for the loss of his dad, because Diddy's dad was murdered at the age of 2. Not only that, he talks about how Janice, Diddy's mom, how she used to throw these big extravagant parties in the building, and how he talks about how it kind of reminds him of a gangster movie or a hustler type of movie. Those were the type of parties that was going on in the house. Also, the mom would make him and Diddy dance in front of everybody. It kind of goes on to why Diddy liked to party a lot, because that's what he was brought up on. He also mentioned that Diddy used to get bullied as a kid and his mama used to beat his ass, and he put emphasis on, yeah, he got whoopings, but when Diddy got whoopings, it was bad, like really bad, until he got toughened up and then he started fighting for himself. And he said Diddy would fight dirty. He would bite people and all kinds of stuff. It was also mentioned that Puff used to look up to this man named Alpo Martinez, who was a Harlem drug lord, and he was famous, he had money, and one thing that he used to do was he used to tape girls, doing the dude hunching, and then he would go to a party and show it to everybody. And then that's one of the reasons why we here today. And speaking of taping women, a woman by the name of Joy Dickerson has sued Diddy in 2023 of November for assault, because in 1991 she said she used to work with Diddy as a party promoter, and she helped promote a party. One party was named Daddy's House, and then she said one day they went to a party, and then she said she was feeling a little weird and she was drugged. And then later on, she said one day somebody came up to her and told her that there is a tape of her, and they showed it to her, and she said she tried to take action but nobody would help her. And she said one person told her that if I help you, then how am I going to get into the Diddy parties? Crazy, right? But hold on, her mama also wrote a letter to Diddy.
Dear Mr. and Mrs. Combs, I'm writing you to inform you of something that your son did to my daughter. One weekend while visiting my daughter, I awoke to her screaming in the middle of the night. She told me that she was dreaming about Puffy. I asked her why she was screaming and who is this Puffy person that he would cause her to have nightmares. I was shocked and mortified to hear her story. She told me that several people have come to her to inform her that your son has made an obscene videotape of her. Without her knowledge, he videotaped him doing something sexual to her. Apparently, your son shows these tapes at parties on large screen televisions. I realize that this may be hard for you to believe, But if I hadn't heard this story from my daughter's own mouth and looked into her eyes, I would have scarcely believed that any individual would compromise another person's dignity in this manner.
Crazy, right? But hold on though. So years later, she said she saw Diddy in public and she confronted him, and she said this man dropped to his knees with tears in his eyes as if he was about to apologize, but all he did was deny, and said that stuff never happened. Crazy. Alright, so we are still in 1991 and it is December. So Puffy and Heavy D had hosted a charity all-star basketball game that erupted into chaos because, for one, it was overcrowded and they oversold the tickets, and people had bum rushed in and caused a big stampede. And because of that, 9 people was unalive during that day, and the media and everybody was blaming Diddy for it, and somehow he got away with it. And Puff said it out his own mouth. Because of that tragedy, it's the reason why he became more famous. So we are now in 1992, and now Diddy is the vice president of A&R artist development for Uptown record label. And then he already have Jodeci and Mary J. Blige under his belt. And then he ended up getting fired by Andre Harrell because he said Diddy got too big for the label, and also him and Diddy was bumping heads. But when he got fired, Andre allowed him to keep Biggie. Then Puff took Biggie to Clive Davis. Clive Davis bought into Diddy's vision with $10 million, and that's how they created Bad Boy Entertainment. He gave his friend Eric Burroughs 25% in stock into the company, and his mother 75% into the company. And this is how Diddy protected himself against that whole crisis that happened at that basketball game in 1991. And now we are at the end of the episode, and then they get to talking about how Puff was jealous of Biggie and Tupac relationship, and they also mentioned that Puff was somewhat jealous of Pac because Pac was a very likable person. He was a movie star and he didn't manipulate his way into fame. And they also insinuated that Puff did have some type of involvement into Pac's murder, but still to this day, Puff have not been charged with any crime to connection to that case. And they end this episode with saying that since Puff had never faced consequences for his actions, he became untouchable. He felt untouchable. So that's everything y'all need to know about episode 1. Tell me what y'all thought about it, and make sure y'all like and follow to find out about episode 2.
All right, so I just watched episode 1 of Sean Combs' The Reckoning. Here are my thoughts, man. Before I give y'all my thoughts, before I made this post, I went on about a 2-minute rant shitting on Netflix because I thought I was going to have to pay for a premium subscription in order to watch this, because I used to share my partners. Me and my partner used to share. We used to share the password. I actually still have access to it. So Netflix, if you see my last post, ignore that. All right, now back to Puff. Watching the backstory of how Puff became Puff. I used to watch a lot of VH1 documentaries and stuff like that as a kid. I've always been really fascinated in the music industry. And artists and stuff like that. So, and I'm an artist myself. But I've always been fascinated. So I'm familiar with how Puff became Puff. I did not know about the abuse from his mom and then how he became an abuser though. I wasn't familiar with that. I'm talking about physically abusing people. The talks about Puff's jealousy though is what's standing out to me. Because for someone who has access to everything or has a lot already, what do you need to be jealous for? I'm always interested in where that jealousy comes from. Where does it stem from? To where even what you have is not enough. You need other people's stuff too. They talked about him with Justin's mom and how, she dated Eric Sermon, I believe, first. But, Puff really tried to make sure that she was away from Eric Sermon and he was jealous of their relationship. And, he did everything he could to sort of take her from Eric Sermon. And then obviously things became physical, and then we got Justin. And then it ends off on his jealousy towards Big and Pac's friendship and how close they were. And I'm just damn, bro. For somebody who has everything, we've all known Puff as Puff being the guy. All this money, all this capital, all this power, all these resources. How are you a jealous person? I don't understand that.
So I just started the Sean Diddy Combs, The Reckoning, Part 1. I measure a documentary by the context that you give me, by the backstory. Lay the groundwork. Take the time to do the research. You see what I'm saying? Because I can come to the conclusion that this person is bad or that they're a villain, but tell me the villain origin story. Tell me how and who created the monster. They did a really good job of that. Can you imagine if Diddy had stayed at Howard? Oh my God, he would have been one of them evil ass SGA niggas. Probably would have got accusations on campus. Dead the fuck. Because the way they're describing him as a go-getter, how tenacious he is, he clearly has the mentality of a winner. I've been seeing different people on my For You page this week talk about how people underplay being an overachiever. Well, two separate conversations. One, that looking like you want to do stuff and trying is lame. And then how it's very easy to be successful when you're an overachiever because it makes you realize how much everyone else doesn't try. So even if you just try a little bit, you're already set apart so much. So imagine if you tried a lot of it. And when they tell a story about how he ran to get Harrell, whatever the fuck he wanted to get him, he was back in 5 minutes because he ran there and back. That just shows how tenacious he was. I've almost been trampled. I've told this story about how I was almost trampled and I had to hold on to a column. So I was very triggered watching this story about the basketball game that essentially made Diddy famous because people died and he had promoted that party. And it's kind of ironic given how his legacy is now, that the start of that legacy was built on the back of tragedy. And what's crazy is he was obviously a fucked up person to begin with because of what he did to the girl way before that basketball party. But I can only imagine how that altered his psyche, because I don't think anyone would go through something like that, especially being someone in your early 20s where you throw a party and people are trampled. To me, that's even worse than when you throw a party and there's a drive-by. Because unfortunately, I've been at parties. I left, granted, but I've been to a party where somebody was killed, because they came and sprayed. I was thinking about dang, the people who threw that party, they're fucked up behind this. They're sad. They're giving sad vibes right now because they threw this party and some shit popped off and that wasn't their intention. They wanted people to come and have a good time. Obviously, his intention was to throw a cool ass, basketball game for celebrity rappers. And it turned into some shit, But to be trampled, it's people died because of the hype, because they want to come to your party. So it's you didn't do anything wrong, but it's you're the reason. That would fuck with your brain. And that would harden you. We're literally, us TikTokers are on here talking about how when y'all are fucking mean, we're hardened by it, right? Something like that, when people are dying, Kim, that is gonna harden anybody. And someone who's already fucked up, exactly. He became a villainous monster. And this how you know that nigga ain't right in the head. What you mean you went to swing on a nigga, got in a nigga car? He could have did whatever to you and said, hey, actually I don't want to fight. Listen to this album.
This man just said that what happened at that college was how Diddy became famous. He became famous after that. And then Diddy himself said, I became famous after a tragedy. I think y'all was right about this. This is diabolical. This go a lot deeper than I think people realize. You're talking about he's a part of a special sect of black men in the Illuminati. He a warlock. And that's why he do stuff from behind, because that's connected to your spinal cord and your juice. I think you're fucking right. If this his claim to fame is how he said he became famous. And then his daddy was set on fire. I just learned that. That's how his daddy died. His drug dealer daddy. What is happening?
First things first, I wanted to start off this documentary by saying rest in peace Andre Harrell, but Diddy Hell had to learn it from somewhere. Second of all, Usher's mother, you should be in jail too. The Diddy documentary on Netflix, executive produced by Curtis 50 Cent Jackson, dropped yesterday. There are 4 episodes. I know y'all haven't watched all of them. We are doing this in order. We are on episode 1. Because I have to stay on episode 1, I can't address Usher's mama the way I want to address her until I get to episode 2. That being said, I took notes. Let's chat. Number 1, and this is so important, how did 50 Cent get the footage, right? I know they said in the documentary that Diddy was documenting some stuff and so the footage belonged to the company that filmed it. No, I mean, how? Is it how much? What made you want to executive produce this? As I sit here and watch this documentary and I'm looking at Andre Harrell, who is no longer with us. I'm looking at Kim Porter, who is no longer with us. I'm looking at Heavy D, who is no longer with us. I want to be the first person to tell you, I don't want to live in a world where this man is responsible for all of the original founding members of Uptown Records. I think this documentary did a very good job of introducing us to Sean Combs and then allowing it to evolve into, I guess that's going to be Love Combs. I don't know. What I found very interesting is when they talked about Sean Combs at the beginning of his time at Uptown Records, they said Sean didn't drink and he detests marijuana. By the end of episode 1, Sean is telling Andre Harrell, I'm going to be so drunk and high by 8 p.m. tonight, I'm not going to care. What happened to Diddy? I think that Andre might have thought he was getting over on this young, hungry man, but I also think that Sean was conning Andre Harrell. It was all a con. Hi, hello. If you were getting here, don't ask me about nothing that didn't happen in episode 1. This is a recap about episode 1 and episode 1 only. I'm trying to be respectful. I know y'all don't binge watch the way I do. So again, in episode 1, we watch or learn of Sean being a baby when his father passes away and that his mother Janice dressed him in a chinchilla to go to the funeral. Nobody in that family is okay. And then there is this boy who thinks he's going to be a dancer. He wants to be up in all of the music videos. And then he finds Uptown Records' Andre Harrell. He starts off just bugging the front desk assistant who happens to be Kim Porter. And then by the end of episode 1, this man is A&R in charge of Jodeci, who got in the car and just drove to New York because they knew they was going to get a meeting. And then they sung their faces off. At this point, Andre Harrell just buys his $1 million house. He's living it up. He's doing the thing. And all of a sudden, Sean gets in an argument with his mama and has to move in with Andre. The con was conning. The conner was conning the con. And while we have to say thank you for all of the music that came out of Uptown Records, Andre was keeping his artists broke too. Jodeci wasn't living in the $1 million house. While we're on the subject of Janice, there used to be a show that came on and it was about women criminals, right? And it was this lady. She had a husband who was a drug lord. He was moving that way, okay? Unfortunately, he got unalived while he was serving one of his people, okay? Because it was the 70s, there was no cell phones, all of that. The wife said, you know what? I'm going to keep the empire alive. I told you that story because I think that's what Janice Combs did. I think the empire was coochie, prostitution, trafficking, if you will. It is still episode 1. And by the end, we have realized that we have moved from Sean to Puffy. And Puffy wants to be like the drug lords. If you use your memory at the beginning of the episode, right, we were told that Sean Combs did not drink and he detests marijuana. Closer to the end of it, we then have footage of Sean Combs, Puffy, if you will, saying, listen, by 8 p.m. tonight, I'm going to be so drunk and high that it won't matter. It is at this point that we find out he is living with Andre Harrell. Andre Harrell goes out of town, and this is where we get the first SA accusation that we, the public, know of. Okay, so boom, the party at Andre's house happens. People are starting to leave. This one girl, Diddy, says, hey, I need an extra for the video. Do you want to be in the video? The girl says, yes. Okay, fine. What ends up happening is that Puffy drugs this lady, takes advantage of her. He films the whole thing. The girl don't know she's drugged. Later on down the line, Puffy is showing this video to people. Let's pause there. There is a popular drug lord in town. Remember, they still in New York, who has this same MO. And you remember, Sean, as we know him, he wants to be that guy. He wants to be the man. So now, in addition to trying to be Andre Harrell, he is also trying to be said drug lord. Again, he's showing the tape of the young lady he took advantage of. And then he decides he wants to be Harvey Weinstein, right? My words, not anybody else's. Because he calls Kirk. Kirk is the co-founder of Bad Boy. He calls Kirk into his office while he getting the sloppy toppy. He getting the fellatio, okay? That good Becky is happening to Diddy while he calls somebody into the office. And he didn't want none. He just wanted that man to see him getting the sloppy toppy. When it comes to the music that Diddy has produced, take that. I don't think we can take the credit from him. He's good at what he does. But when we have people like his son's godfather telling us that he saw with his own obstacles, Diddy beat the snot out of his baby mama, we have to really think. Diddy was allowed to do this just like R. Kelly was allowed to do it because they were cash cows. And that's the real, we need to get, who's paying them? That's what we need to get to the bottom of, 50 Cent.
Let's jump into my favorite part of all of the content I post on YouTube. And that's just my thoughts, where I get to kind of express what I feel about whatever we have read or gone over. So let's get into it. All right, let's get into it. So this is my recap, commentary, etc. on episode 1 of the Sean Combs The Reckoning documentary. And I am calling this The Making of a Manipulator, what Diddy's documentary teaches women about spotting dangerous men early. And there's 5 major points that I think are very useful to bring out of this documentary just as a relationship coach. And then I'll go into just some random points that I saw as I watched this. So point number 1, early charm often masks early manipulation. So in episode 1, we see Diddy's tenacity at Uptown Records is framed as being admirable, running across New York for errands, charming his way into rooms, and, knocking on Heavy D's door every day. But behind the hustle was strategic manipulation. He consumed attention like oxygen. He positioned himself as indispensable, and he studied what people wanted and delivered just enough to gain leverage. So the lesson here is charm is not character. A man can be charismatic, helpful, and attuned, but not because he cares. Sometimes he's gathering data for later control, okay? And we see this a lot in the way that his early years are spoken about and even his interactions with his mother. Ask yourself when you meet a man, does he charm with reciprocity or does he charm for access? Does the charm stop once he has you? Is his charisma tied to pressure or entitlement? Things to ask yourself. Point number 2, a man who studies people to exploit them is not smart. He's unsafe. So in this documentary, we see this referenced a lot, that Diddy studies people. Yes, in a healthy, balanced sense, it is good for you to study people and understand situations you're walking into. But in the way that Diddy has done it, as expressed in this documentary, it is very predatory. Diddy learned people early, okay? His mother made him perform at parties for adults. Red flag right there, scary. Conditioning him to read a room. He also probably had to do that for safety purposes, for his own safety as a child performing in these rooms. He watched hustlers and drug lords operate, especially Alpo Martinez, who famously recorded unsuspecting women and played the tapes at parties. So he knew what he was doing. He internalized the formula. Knowledge gives advantage, advantage gives control. And he later came onto the world like a storm and a hurricane in the way he operated for, 30 plus years at this point? This later shows up in the allegations where women describe being filmed without consent, drugged, or manipulated. We know that Diddy learns what people want and he dangles just enough in front of them. And a lot of men do this too in relationships. So a lesson that I would want my clients to understand from this, or any of you listening, is a man with emotional intelligence but no emotional maturity becomes a psychological weapon. Diddy is a very intelligent person and he's very emotionally intelligent, but he's not emotionally mature. And a lot of times he exhibits a lot of instability in the way he has behaved, violent, abusive, etc., but even in lesser ways. So you need to ask yourself, when you're out here dating, Does this man use what you confide in him to comfort you or to control you? Does he drop little tidbits of what you've said to him in confidence in a means to manipulate you? Does he read you to take care of you or to weaken your defenses? These are things to keep in sight of, because you have to remember there are a lot of people who still like and uphold Diddy, right? He is a menace in a lot of ways that he's operated, and we've seen that demonstrated through the different episodes. But in episode 1, I think we get the early bearings of that, and it's important for you to protect yourself to ask these questions. Point number 3, men who are never told no grow into men who believe they own a yes for everything. So Diddy faced minimal consequences early. He oversold that city college charity event and 9 people died and there was no accountability, and he blew up after that. Like, what type of mess is that? That is scary. That many people lost their lives and there was really no consequences for him. And even if you look on the blogs and in Reddit and etc., you hear about how he was a menace while in Howard, and even after he left Howard University, was never held accountable for many of the things he did. He continued rising in fame, even saying that tragedy is the reason I became famous. Now, segue to this. This has a lot of the spiritual community on TikTok, the Black spiritual community on TikTok, talking about how that was a ritual and an initiation, and that was a human sacrifice for him to get the things that he has, right? The early trappings of success. I do believe that there is some credence there. And I think people need to watch the way people move. And if a lot of tragedy is always surrounding a person, what is actually being shown? And then when he allegedly violated a Joy Dickerson in the documentary in part 1, episode 1, people told her they couldn't help her because they needed access to his parties. Can you imagine? So I think that is such a key takeaway there. The world said yes before he earned it and kept saying yes even when he caused harm. And that is a very scary thought, because what Joy Dickerson went through is sadly a very normal situation for women who are harmed and assaulted by powerful men. Because people want to continue to have access to that man, they are going to brush under the rug, negate, and sidestep what a woman saying harm that man caused. So what I would want my clients to understand is if a man has been rewarded for bad behavior, he will continue in it. Because why wouldn't he? A man who believes he is untouchable becomes a partner who dismisses your boundaries, minimizes your feelings, expects forgiveness before accountability, and sees relationships as privileges he grants, not partnership he nurtures. I think you see this more, especially with high earning men and men who have a celebrity status in some way. And Puffy being what we're talking about here, we definitely see it here. But if you are ever in relationships with gentlemen who fit into these categories, this is a very common thing. They were never told no, so they are growing into, they think they own a yes. Point number 4, jealousy plus entitlement is one of the most dangerous combinations in male behavior. Puffy's jealousy shows up repeatedly. He was jealous of Tupac's natural charisma and authentic rise. He was jealous of Biggie's closeness with Pac and his own, way of being and magnetic charm. He was jealous of Eric Sermon's relationship with Justin's mother, Misa Hilton, allegedly intervening aggressively to separate them. And he was jealous even while having success, power, women, and fame. This was not romantic jealousy. It was territorial jealousy, the kind that leads to sabotage, control, and domination. Because at the end of the day, that theme was constantly repeated in episode 1. Diddy wants control, total control. That is not a healthy thing to desire to have over another human being, especially not a partner. But even if it's your child, that is not healthy. Okay. So a lesson here is that the most dangerous men are not the broke or the insecure. It's the ones who have everything and still feel threatened. Once again, when you are out here dating, especially the women that I am privileged to coach with, who have, a couple coins, and they can put themselves in certain spaces and are of a higher socioeconomic status and tax bracket, they need to be aware of meeting the men who have things and still want more, especially their things, their time, their money, their womb, etc. So you need to ask yourself, does this man get jealous when you receive attention, opportunities, or praise? Does he compare himself constantly to you, other women, or to men? And does he punish you emotionally when he feels less than? Jealousy is a predictor, not a personality quirk. And it is a very dangerous predictor because a lot of men don't know how to handle jealousy. A lot of people don't know how to effectively handle jealousy, but especially men. And that often can, quickly pivot to something very more harmful, such as physical harm or violence. Important number 5. Unhealed trauma does not excuse harmful behavior, especially repeated harm. In this documentary, in episode 1, we see traces of deep trauma in Diddy's upbringing. His father was murdered when he was 2. His mother beat him violently until he got tough. He learned that survival required aggression. Pain was normalized. Empathy was very foreign to him. That is an explanation, it's not an excuse. But, and this is critical, the trauma is not the problem. His lack of accountability and escalation of harm is, and his lack of going to seek help through licensed professionals, mental health professionals and therapists to help him address this in the right way to heal from it has not been something he has prioritized in his life, obviously, and that's where we're at today in 2025. Puffy became powerful enough to reenact his wounds on others with no consequence. Okay? So, a lesson I need women to understand is a tragic backstory explains a man, it never excuses him. So, women need to understand that you cannot love a man into healing. You cannot love a man past his trauma. You cannot sacrifice yourself to fix his childhood. And trauma unprocessed becomes trauma inflicted. Okay? Very important things. Sounds like Diddy experienced a lot of trauma growing up, and he then went out and unleashed it on anyone who came into his purview in some way, shape, or form, especially under his ownership or control through his record label. Questions that someone needs to ask if you're dating somebody is this man's trauma something he acknowledges and is actively working on? And then you need to ask how far along he is in that journey. Healing is not linear, and he may be too early on in his journey to be a viable option for a partner for you, and you need to recognize that. Or is his trauma something he uses to justify violence, jealousy, manipulation, or chaos? More often than not, the second question is going to be what is the yes. And that is because unhealed trauma is a direction, not a destiny, and a lot of people don't want to follow the direction that it's leading them, which is to healing. They need to go and seek healing. But a man must choose the path that he wants to take, and you cannot choose that for him. But you also don't need to be a target of that unhealed trauma for him. Episode 1 of The Reckoning isn't just about Diddy. It's a sobering reminder that patterns don't disappear simply because someone becomes successful, influential, or adored. Unhealed men do not grow out of their wounds. They grow into them. And when they gain power without accountability, those patterns scale. They don't soften. As women dating in the modern world, you need more than intuition. You need discernment, tools, and a community that sharpens your awareness rather than dulls it. Because emotional safety is not a luxury. It's the baseline. If this breakdown resonated, if you caught yourself seeing parallels in your dating history, maybe not as dramatic, then sis, it's time to go deeper. Join my exclusive coaching community on Coffee, where we unpack relationships with clarity, strategy, and spiritual alignment. You'll get regular lessons, red flag decoding, feminine boundary work, and guided support to help you stop attracting chaos and start choosing peace. Your next chapter deserves